Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today, as always. Very thrilled to be back with Niall Standage. Niall, good morning.
Good morning, Amber. Great to see you. It's been a little while.
It has.
How have you been?
I've been doing well.
Are you surviving these inclement weather conditions okay?
Barely. I hate the cold.
We have the promise of more moderate weather this week.
Allegedly,
so
we'll see.
We'll see if that proves to be a false promise or not.
I'll be in Missouri, so.
Oh, look at you.
It'll
That's
be warmer.
Much better option. Coming up on Rising, Hillary Clinton is pushing for her testimony on Jeffrey Epstein to be done publicly, telling Republican Congressman James Comer, let's stop the games.
Plus, former Vice President Kamala Harris's team has relaunched one of its social media accounts with an initial focus on reaching out to Gen Z voters.
And meanwhile, the Winter Olympics are getting underway with the opening ceremonies later today in Milan, Italy. But even overseas, we're still seeing controversy over the presence of ice.
But first, President Trump raised some eyebrows and even drew some backlash from conservatives in his recent interview with NBC News.
Speaking on the recent turmoil in Minnesota following the killings of Renee Good and Alex Pretty, Trump struck a somewhat different tone and appeared to show a measure of regret over how things had unfolded in the state. Take a look at his response when NBC's Tom Yamas asked what he learned from those events in Minneapolis.
I learned that maybe we can use a little bit of a softer touch, but you still have to be tough. These are criminals. We're dealing with really hard criminals.
Trump also said that he's had, quote, great conversations over the phone with Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. This comes as border czar Tom Homan announced that 700 federal officers would be removed from the city of Minneapolis. Mayor Frey called that development, quote, a step in the right direction, but he still demanded that the operation in full be stopped in its entirety.
But Trump's comments about needing a softer touch were a surprise to many, and on the right, some showed concern that the president isn't taking as hard of a stance as he should. Here's Florida Congressman Byron Donalds speaking with News Nation's Katie Pavlich.
Look, I think this is a very dangerous road to go down, I do. The Democrats want ICE to operate like it did under Joe Biden, meaning ICE did nothing. They sat in their offices and they had no actionable authority from the President of the United States to do their duty under the Constitution. Are there some strategic moves that Tom Homan obviously wants to employ in Minneapolis and things like that? Okay, let's examine that. But nothing can deter the mission of deporting criminal illegal aliens out of the United States.
At Thursday's White House press briefing, Secretary Caroline Leavitt clarified the president's comments, saying that the burden is more on local authorities to cooperate with immigration laws.
The full context of his answer was that he'd like to see a softer touch, but we are always going to remain tough. That softer touch the president is referring to is that cooperation that is necessary between state and local authorities and federal government authorities to ensure that we can continue deporting illegal aliens from our communities. The escalation that we've seen take place in Minnesota is a direct result of the refusal of state and local officials to cooperate with the federal government and with ICE, which has led to these hostile and dangerous environments, and so we don't want that.
So I agree with Caroline Leavitt's assessment that a lot of the escalation has been due to a lack of cooperation. I think if you had local police there doing crowd control, helping execute warrants or allow ICE to issue detainers at local jails, etc., that things would be running a lot more smoothly. But I don't buy her explanation that that's what Trump meant when he said softer touch. I think it's pretty evident based on the removal of 700 troops from Minnesota and the way that Trump has been talking about this in the past week, that they do want to sort of ratchet down a little bit the operation that's happening in Minnesota writ large. So I think there's a little bit of wordplay going on here with the press secretary.
Yeah, no, there's definitely wordplay going on. I mean, you and I would have very different views on the substance of this, the fundamental approach to it. But I do think that the politics of this are playing in a lot to this changing rhetoric, right? Because although, I mean, we have spoken before about the fact that in 2024, immigration was Trump's strongest issue by far in most polls. People wanted a more forceful approach. People were understandably frustrated or concerned or fearful about southern border crossings that at one stage were running well over 200,000 a month. Then it seems to me the pendulum has swung on that to a very significant degree, partly because of the killings of Alex Pretty and Renee Good, partly because of the Stephen Miller type rhetoric about, calling Pretty a assassin and all that stuff. And so we see in polling a lot of people really arguing or asserting that ICE and Trump's broader enforcement efforts generally are going too far. I understand that. It's clearly not Byron Donalds' view, for example, and I suspect it's not your view. It's conservatives have a different view on that. But to me, Trump. Look, Trump's Trump. People will have whatever opinions they have about him. We've talked about that a lot. But he does have a political antenna. I would acknowledge that. And I think that he sees the genuine annoyance or dislike of things going as far as they have.
I think that is exactly right. It's a political calculation. Republicans are obviously worried about the midterms. They have been for a while. The numbers don't look good for them. And they want to find a way to basically continue deporting illegal aliens without angering a broader swath of the American public. And so they're trying to find this balance between, okay, well, how do we continue to execute this mission without having these chaotic, tragic moments that get people turning against us? Because when you look at the polling, people say that ICE is going too far, that Trump is going too far, but you still see broad majority support for mass deportations, for securing the southern border, for ICE being allowed to operate without interference from protesters or from state and local officials and police. And so I do think that there is space for the president to find that middle ground where he's still doing mass deportations, but it's not as intense as it is currently. But that's also going to anger a significant portion of the base that wants this to be executed as quickly as possible, because he has possibly only another year, really, less than that at this point, if Republicans lose the midterms, where he has the entirety of the federal government backing him in his plans. He's managed to get about 2.5 million people out so far through a combination of deportations and self-deportations. There are estimated 20 to 30 million illegal aliens in the country. If you just do the math, that's an incredibly difficult thing to do in 4 years, let alone 2. And so the concern is, okay, well, if you pull back, are we going to get to that number that we really want to see by the end of Trump's term?
Right. Well, it's also, I think that is an interesting point, and it's certainly a very clear articulation of the conservative view. I do think it gets to the point, though, about in terms of deportations themselves, do people want to see sweeping deportations of everyone who is here illegally or without authorization, or do they have that as a sort of abstract ideal, but they believe that the prioritization should be on people who have been convicted of serious crimes?
Broadly, that's probably true.
Right.
And the general public.
Right. And so I think that then, if we're talking about the politics of this, rather than, as it were, the ethics or the morality of it, I think the danger for Trump and for the Republicans is becoming identified with an approach that is so aggressive that people in the middle ground, including independents in a lot of these polls, seem to feel that the tears to the social fabric or the tensions that are created outweigh the goal that is purportedly being sought.
Yeah, I think that's probably right from the political perspective. And, I will say, looking at the DHS numbers, we have seen that those statistics in terms of how many people who have been deported have prior criminal records or criminal accusations does indicate that they have been prioritizing the worst of the worst, or at the very least, people who have committed crimes in the United States or in their home countries before they came to the United States. It's about 70% of the people who have been deported who have those criminal records. Could they get to 80 or 90? I don't know, maybe. But again, that does take the state and local cooperation of being willing to lodge and respect those detainers from ICE officials. So Jacob Frey, I think, is going to have some tension with Tim Walz, who is more willing to cooperate. Jacob Frey just wants them to not do any deportations in Minnesota, whereas Tim Walz has suggested some kind of limited arrangement with federal officials. It certainly would make it easier for the administration to get people who are already being arrested for different crimes and to do it in places where you're not going to have mass street protests, which I think would really help calm things down.
I would have lots to say if we had a longer discussion about the whole sanctuary city argument and the importance of trust in law enforcement, but we are out of time. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton is challenging House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer to make her Jeffrey Epstein hearing public. We'll be right back with that. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is daring House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer to make her hearing on Jeffrey Epstein public.
Clinton and her husband, former President Bill Clinton, agreed to testify after Comer teed up a House vote to hold both of the Clintons in contempt of Congress.
Clinton took to X on Thursday and she wrote, "For 6 months, we engaged Republicans on the Oversight Committee in good faith. We told them what we know under oath. They ignored all of it. They moved the goalposts and turned accountability into an exercise in distraction. So let's stop the games. If you want this fight, James Comer, let's have it in public. You love to talk about transparency. There's nothing more transparent than a public hearing, cameras on. We will be there." A spokesperson for Hillary Clinton, Nick Merrill, criticised Comer and accused him of changing the stipulations of the hearing. Specifically, Merrill wrote, quote, "At the 11th hour, James Comer asked for a camera. That's fine. He can have 1,000 cameras. The Clintons will do this publicly."
Oversight Republicans responded to those claims on X, posting screenshots of emails between Clinton's team and the committee. Oversight Republicans said that the Clintons were spinning the facts and wrote, in part, "These terms are no different than any other deposition we have held on this case, even with Republicans like former AG Bill Barr and Secretary Alex Acosta." Then they pretended that we were moving the goalpost when they received, along with the subpoenas, the House deposition guidance that explicitly mentions video recordings. We are going to get answers for the American people, the full truth. Initially, Comer had rejected requests from the Clintons for a closed-door deposition and written testimony. Hillary Clinton is set to testify February 26, and Bill Clinton's deposition will follow on the next day.
Well, this is an interesting one about sort of the theatrics of Congress in part, it seems to me. I mean, I actually try to be as universal in the principles about this sort of stuff, whether it's a Democrat like Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton or Republicans being called to testify as they were when Democrats had the majority. Firstly, I think you should comply with subpoenas, so just blanket, you should. And on the topic of this issue of whether they should be public or not, I tend to think that it is better for hearings to be public. I mean, unless it is actual, like an intelligence briefing. I mean, there's obviously valid reasons, or a situation where the victims of some kind of abuse are going to have to be discussed. You don't want that on live TV. But with a few very limited exceptions, I would think that hearings should be live. People can watch the entirety if they have the time and feel the inclination, and it avoids this thing of not exactly selective editing, but selective selection of clips to try to prove a political point one way or another.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there have been a lot of depositions, as mentioned, from the Oversight Committee related to the Epstein files, and they have basically handled these by Comer releasing his interpretation of what was said behind closed doors or certain quotes, and it's all very selective releases. And I would much rather be able to see for myself what actually happened. This happened during the Biden investigation when they were bringing in former Biden aides. We would get these statements from the Oversight Committee or from Comer's office saying, so-and-so said this about Biden's doctor, or they pleaded the fifth on this point, and the person who was in there doesn't really get the opportunity to respond or to correct the narrative.
Right.
And so it's nicer to be able to just have it all play out on camera. Now, from an entertainment perspective, too, do I want to see Hillary and Bill Clinton going to bat against the Oversight Republicans? Yes, absolutely. I think it would be wildly fun to watch that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think these things always create political drama, political theater, and I think that's completely valid. I'm not like sanctimonious about that sort of stuff. The other thing that I find odd in part of Comer's argument, like the Clintons may have known that there were going to be cameras, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds of that, but Comer's argument, I think, is we were always going to use cameras and the issue was whether it was going to be broadcast live or released later.
Right.
And then he says, well, I don't want it to be broadcast live. I'm paraphrasing here, because then you encourage grandstanding. But if it's on camera and it's going to be released sometime, you encourage grandstanding either way. It's like people don't go, oh, well, just because it's not live, I'm going to ask some very undramatic and substantive question. I mean, we're just in an age of politics where people are playing to the gallery all the time.
Yeah, and these hearings are often ways for politicians to fundraise, to get viral clips.
Right.
They obviously write their questions on both sides of the aisle in a way that is meant to garner the most amount of attention and to make them the star of the hearing. This was a huge part of Kamala Harris's strategy when she was a senator, right? When she was on the Judiciary Committee, she liked to have these very fiery exchanges with witnesses to show that she was, the tough prosecutor. And there are Republicans who have used this in much the same way, from Marjorie Taylor Greene and on. And they like to have their staff try to draft whatever's going to help them have a clip on X get millions of views, and they send them out, and they encourage influencers to share them, and that's how it is. I think it's true that there would be some level of higher decorum if the hearing was not broadcast live, just because there's no guarantee then that your clip is going to be even aired. But maybe that's even a greater incentive.
You want your clip aired. That's the most dramatic thing I can possibly
say.
Right.
How do I get James Comer to make sure that my clip is released publicly?
That's true. I also wonder, to your point about, politicians on all sides trying to create these moments, I sometimes wonder, do any of these hearings really change the political dial in terms of people who don't already have an opinion? Because Robbie and I were talking about this yesterday. I don't know if you saw Maxine Waters and Scott Bessent went at each other. And whether there's a winner in any of those kind of exchanges seems highly doubtful to me, because what happens in a situation like that is people who are pro-Trump or Republican go, Scott Bessent stood up to Maxine Waters, and people who are Democrat or Liberal go, yes, Maxine Waters took it to Scott Bessent. And each side cheers on its representative, and that's kind of that.
Yeah, I think that's right. It happens every time where people who already have an opinion about the person say, oh, they ate that person up, or they destroyed them, they cooked them. Right. And in terms of these investigations in Congress, one of the things that the MAGA base gets really frustrated about is Republicans really engaging in the political theater rather than taking real action. And so there's sort of a meme among Republicans of they just like to write letters and have hearings instead of actually legislating.
I think that's a valid criticism for sure, and it's just generally endemic in the political culture right now.
That's true. All right, up next, the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's kidnapping continues as authorities have still found no suspects. Don't go anywhere.
Today marks the 6th day of searching for the mother of Today Show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, Nancy Guthrie, who has allegedly been abducted from her home outside of Tucson.
The 84-year-old Guthrie went missing on Sunday afternoon after she did not show up at church. Pima County, Arizona Sheriff Chris Nano said at a news conference Thursday that there are still no suspects. He added that blood found on the porch of Nancy Guthrie's home was confirmed to be hers, and that they are currently working with the FBI to check a number of incoming leads.
Authorities also noted that Guthrie's doorbell camera was disconnected at 1:47 a.m. Sunday, and that another camera on Guthrie's property detected motion at 2:12 a.m., but that no video was recorded. Then at 2:28 a.m., Guthrie's pacemaker got disconnected from her cell phone, which was later found at the house.
President Trump spoke with Savannah Guthrie by phone on Wednesday and later wrote on social media, I spoke with Savannah and let her know that I am directing all federal law enforcement to be at the family's and local law enforcement's complete disposal immediately. We are deploying all resources to get her mother home safely. The prayers of our nation are with her and her family. God bless and protect Nancy.
Savannah Guthrie and her siblings are still urging their mother's abductors to get in touch with them. Here is Nancy Guthrie's son, Cameron, saying on social media on Thursday that they have still not heard anything. If there are kidnappers there, they've not heard anything from them directly. Let's listen to that.
This is Cameron Guthrie. I'm speaking for the Guthrie family. Whoever is out there holding our mother, we want to hear from you. We haven't heard anything directly. We need you to reach out, and we need a way to communicate with you so we can move forward. But first, we have to know that you have our mom. We want to talk to you, and we are waiting for contact.
This is such a really sad and scary story.
Absolutely.
They haven't found much, it seems, to point towards what actually happened here. Obviously, the blood at the house and the general state of her home suggested she was abducted. There was some kind of ransom note that I guess was delivered to TMZ, but they haven't confirmed whether or not it's real. And they haven't been able to actually make contact with the person who supposedly sent that. Now, in addition, there was a separate individual who posed as the abductor, but was not, and was arrested and charged accordingly. But this is, I mean, obviously, the longer these things go on, the less hope you have that there's going to be a positive resolution.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to reiterate what you said, I mean, it's just such a sad story and a kind of nightmarish story for Savannah Guthrie and her siblings. I mean, such a succession of bizarre details from what we do know on this. On the point about notes and so on, there was additionally a TV station in Arizona that says it got contacted by someone, or there's some message sent to them, including details that only an abductor would know, which obviously does suggest that one is credible. But just to have all this play out, so much uncertainty, I mean, it's understandably a huge national story. I suppose it's possible, if Nancy Guthrie has been abducted, that it's not related to Savannah Guthrie's prominence, but that seems, I'm not normally one who believes much in coincidences, at least at that level.
I agree. And based on the timing of the camera going out, and she had shortly returned to her home earlier that evening, it suggests to me that maybe someone could have been watching her and planning this for quite some time, which adds another element of sort of creep factor and disturbance. And I just really feel for the family. I cannot imagine how I would feel if this were happening to my parent.
No, and exactly. I mean, I think everyone who has been watching this story puts themselves in that position, and then you have the fact of it playing out in this massive and intense media spotlight. It must be close to unbearable. Just very briefly, I mean, Savannah Guthrie used to be more involved in political journalism. I have never met her, but friends of mine who know her, like even way before this, no one had any bad word to say about her. I think she's generally a very well-liked person, and I mean, I think everyone in the media and the broader country is just sympathetic to the situation.
I sure hope the deployment of those federal resources will help resolve this.
Absolutely.
And I thought that was a wonderful thing for Trump to do.
No, I agree. I have no caveats to that at all.
Next on Rising, Kamala Harris HQ is relaunching on social media, rebranding the organization towards the next generation's leaders. Stick around.
The Kamala Harris headquarters account relaunched on X and on TikTok this week for the first time since the 2024 presidential election. It's part of a new organization now to mobilize young voters ahead of the 2026 midterms. The Harris team is rebranding her social media accounts as Headquarters, and its goal is to be a, quote, youth mobilization organization and a, quote, next generation campaigning initiative. In an X post from the account, they write, quote, welcome to Headquarters, the new Gen Z-led progressive content hub.
Here was a video posted from the account this week.
Madam Vice President, what's going on with Kamala HQ?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. I have good news. So Kamala HQ is turning into Headquarters, and it's where you can go online to get basically the latest of what's going on, and also to meet and revisit with some of our great courageous leaders, be they elected leaders, community leaders, civic leaders, faith leaders, young leaders. I'm really excited about it. So stay engaged, and I'll see you out there. Thank you.
The rebrand is in partnership with the progressive nonprofit People for the American Way to, quote, mobilize pro-justice, pro-fairness, pro-democracy young people against far-right extremism. Harris will be the organization's chair emerita.
You're going to be signing up, Amber?
I'm all in. I love it. No, it's, I don't think this is what people were expecting from Kamala Harris when she said she had an announcement. people thought maybe she was going to do something more directly related to politics. I mean, this is political, but not in terms of obviously running for office or gearing up for a campaign.
Yeah.
Although maybe that's the intention, is that this is the first step to a launch pad to a 2028 run in the Democratic primary. But I saw a lot of mixed reactions, even from people on the left and Democrats who said, you know, oh, why is Kamala doing this? She's not a young person herself.
Yeah.
Does this come across as tone deaf? So I'm not sure this is quite the right move for her.
I am not at all sure of that either. Let me, sorry, I'm going hoarse. Let me just stipulate, I mean, of course I understand the view among Kamala Harris supporters and Democrats generally, which is that Harris gets criticized for, you know, laughing at odd times while Democrats think that Trump's like an existential danger to the country. And,
right.
you know, that one of those things is very different from the other. But there are real questions about Kamala Harris's political ability. She can have good moments. I mean, I thought when she was running, she, in my view, clearly won the debate against Trump that they had. But then she has bad moments too. The famous interview on The View, where it was like, what would you do different from Joe Biden? And it was like, not a single thing, or not.
Nothing comes to
nothing
mind.
comes to mind. So like that was pretty bad. To your point, I mean, I actually completely agree with you that when there had been a tease for this new relaunch, where it seemed to be kind of hyping it up, that there's something really intriguing coming.
Yes.
And then people naturally thought, well, not necessarily that you're going to launch a campaign, but it was going to be something, you know, bold or unexpected or exciting. And it turns out to be this kind of amorphous, everyone should come together and fight for democracy against far-right extremists. I mean, people should come together and fight for democracy against far-right extremists if they wish to do so, but I'm not sure why they need the Kamala HQ account to direct them to that effort. That seems kind of peculiar.
Maybe they're trying to revive the K-Hive. I don't know. But we did a story at the Daily Caller. Our White House correspondent Reagan Reese actually talked to some Democrats about this. And a former Biden-Harris White House aide said, another account that makes memes. Wow, groundbreaking. If I didn't think she was going to make some presidential announcement this early, the former staffer said, but it was telling how ominous it felt. Everyone was nervous. It's easier when she's on the book tour. That's predictable. And a former Democratic admin official said, great team, important goal, terrible candidate. So that does not bode well for how Democrats are feeling about this, I think.
This is one of those tricky ones for me where like I'm like my actual position is kind of lukewarm. I don't think she's a terrible candidate. I just don't think she's a great candidate. And therefore, I think that first of all, I think the fact that her losing in 2024 to Trump was so traumatic for people left of center that in itself saps the appetite for her to run again. I think that people
they
just
have
don't.
PTSD from
They do a little bit. Yeah, they just don't want to go through that again. Yeah. And then broadly, there is, I think, a desire to turn the page. Now, there is a problem that I freely acknowledge for Democrats, which is there is no one amazing candidate who's going to sweep all before him or her. Gavin Newsom has his vulnerabilities. AOC is certainly questionable whether she's electable on a national basis. Pete Buttigieg, I have never been all that impressed with, honestly. So that, I think, creates the possibility that someone as well known as Kamala Harris, who was a previous nominee, could have a shot, but I don't detect any real appetite for it.
I thought it was interesting, too, how the teaser video that you mentioned was really well produced, actually. Mm-hmm. They had this sort of login screen, and it said Kamala HQ, and they were typing in different passwords, and eventually the last one was headquarters.
Right.
And that didn't really tell us anything about what was coming, but it was at least well done, I think, the video. They obviously spent some time on it. But then the actual announcement was just a staffer recording Kamala standing awkwardly in the middle of a room and listing all of the different leaders that are going to be on the platform. And there was such a stark difference between how it was hyped and then how it was actually presented.
I know. I mean, it's not like some fatal mistake. There'll be other factors if she does run. But I was speaking to a friend of mine whose political views I'm not really that clear on, seem pretty neutral to me. And my friend described it as embarrassing. That clip of her talking, on that the one that you're referring to. So not a great moment, not some politically fatal moment, but another one of those moments where I think even Democrats wince a little bit and go, I just don't know.
I said to Robbie yesterday that the way she was describing the leaders, it was young leaders, old leaders, tall leaders, small leaders, one fish, two fish.
Any kind of leaders. All the leaders.
All the leaders are going to be here.
And meanwhile, an op-ed from a Stanford student details how 38% of the school students are registered as having a disability. Stay with us for that next.
An op-ed written by a Stanford University undergraduate student has sparked a discussion online about accommodations for students with disabilities. There's been concern in some academic circles that students at some of the country's most prestigious schools are taking advantage of their disability policies.
And those concerns were echoed in the op-ed written by Stanford's Elsa Johnson, who says that her school will grant single dorm rooms, extra time on tests, and even exemptions from academic requirements to students who qualify as disabled. Johnson writes, one of the most prestigious universities in the US offers perks to those who say they have ADHD, night terrors, even gluten intolerance. You'd be stupid not to game the system. But at Stanford, she goes on, almost no one talks about the system with shame. Rather, we openly discuss, strategize, and even joke about it. At a university of savvy optimizers, the feeling is that if you aren't getting accommodations, you haven't tried hard enough.
This follows a report from The Atlantic published in December, which found that at top schools like Brown and Harvard, more than 20% of undergrads are on the disabled list. And at Stanford, the number is a whopping 38%.
In her op-ed, Johnson describes her experience with registering as a disabled student at Stanford herself. As someone with endometriosis, which I can never really pronounce, she felt justified in claiming the condition as a legitimate disability because it can cause her extreme pain. But even then, she was surprised at how easy the process was. Quote, in addition to a single housing assignment, I was granted extra absences from class, some late days on assignments, and a 15-minute tardiness allowance for all of my classes. I was met with so little skepticism or questioning, I probably didn't even need a doctor's note to get these exemptions. Had I been pushier, I'm sure I could have received almost any accommodation I asked for.
On social media, many people blasted the students for seemingly taking advantage of the disability system. CEO and author Jennifer Say writes, "This is so pathetic. These kids at Stanford are liars and cheats. And of course, it's the most privileged kids at the most elite universities who are claiming disabilities just to get a leg up."
However, others argue that the fault lies more with the universities themselves rather than the students. Businessman Gagan Biani says on X, quote, coddling, let's call it what it is. Stanford shouldn't be saying yes to 40% of its students having disability accommodations. When you coddle our youth, ultimately they suffer the most. Sorry, Gen Z, we can and should do better. This is a very interesting story, Amber. You brought this to our attention, so tell me what you think.
Well, I think it is more so the university's fault, right? They're the ones who are supposed to be the adults in charge. They are supposed to be the ones trying to create an environment where people are pushed and challenged and ultimately can succeed and prepare them for when they ultimately graduate and go out and get jobs and start living in the real world, so to speak. If you're a student and you watch all of your classmates getting all of these advantages for something as simple as gluten intolerance, or in one case she said someone was able to get a single dorm room because they wear contact lenses,
right,
then I think they're right that you would be stupid not to take advantage, because these schools are very highly competitive. A lot of the grades are done on a curve system. And if you're the lone person who's not claiming the disability, right, that would be silly to not take advantage of it. But yes, I think the university officials are at fault here. Now, I do feel for this young lady because I think she's done the right thing in exposing this and writing about her experience. But I know her classmates right now are looking at her like the girl who reminded the teacher about the homework.
She's the snitch.
It'll be her fault when Stanford revises their policy.
It will, and she'll get the blame for it. And she's obviously taking quite a lot of flack, which for an op-ed that seems quite she's simply describing her experiences and describing the dynamics behind those experiences, and that seems fine to me. This is one of those ones where we're pretty much on the same page. It's just, I think, a basic thing in human behavior that once you start seeing a lot of people gaming the system and standards or regulations that should be enforced not being enforced, then the incentive is just to join the people, bending the rules to their own advantage or gaming the system, obviously. And we see that in all kinds of areas in life. Very different example, but for example, I use the metro here in DC a lot. People often get away with evading fares, jumping the gates essentially, and there's very rarely action taken against that. The problem I have with that is that it transmits to other people, particularly other young people who would pay the fare, that they're kind of being fools to pay the fare and just not avoiding it, right?
Niall, are we going to get you to subscribe to Broken Windows Policing Theory today?
Well, let's not go too far, Amber. Let's one bridge at a time. But actually, I mean, there are actually things. This is a very side issue. One thing that I'm small c conservative about is I think in high school there should be school uniform. I don't think.
I'm pro uniform too.
Yeah. So there we go. You see, we do have some common ground. But on this point about the system, it is the failure to enforce reasonable scrutiny on the claim of disability, because obviously people who are suffering from a serious disability, which I think we all know what we mean by that, there should be accommodation made for them. Gluten intolerance, I mean, not to sound like the old grumpy guy about this, but like gluten intolerance, in my view, is not a disability. And, there's no accommodation required in that respect.
And I said earlier that this is not preparing them well for the real world, but actually I should take that back, because in the real world, there is now a lot of the same type of behavior taking place with failure to enforce rules. I mean, I'm sure you've seen some of the so-called service animals that people have.
Right. That's
United
another one.
States,
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, bringing these little purse dogs on plane, and it's their service animal because it brings them comfort or something. It's absurd.
Right.
But this is where we've gotten, right? Like people have looked at certain advantages or accommodations that people get, and they try to push the boundaries, and it is on our political leaders, on school officials who have allowed those lines to become super blurry and to just reject basic common sense when it comes to actually enforcing these policies.
Right. And the person who used the term coddling there, I do think that's part of it. I mean, I think that society has changed in a whole lot of ways, and one of them is that people feel much more comfortable voicing their discomfort or inner feelings about various things, and I think that can be healthy to a degree. But stoicism and getting on with things has its place too, and we don't.
So like a true Irishman.
Well, yeah, none of those feelings. You just get on
Have
with
a
things
pint
and just plow ahead with it. And just on the point about people gaming the system, there was in the young woman's op-ed also a comment about how at Stanford, meal plans that you're compelled to pay for, they cost something like I don't know if it's per semester, per $7,000 or something. But if you claim certain religious exemptions, you can avoid that. And the Jain religion, which is, I think, predominantly Eastern and I think of Indian origin, where it holds that you can't consume anything that causes any damage to a living being. And so there's been upshot of people, of Jainists at Stanford to avoid those costs.
I'll end this on a somewhat spicy political note, which is I do think there's some wokeness happening here.
Oh.
We're
going to disagree at the final moment,
I know,
Amber.
but I'll explain why. There's I think this more common trend over the past 5-10 years where you're not allowed to really question people who claim they have disabilities, and then there's the idea of like invisible disabilities. And so I do think that general attitude that if somebody says they have something wrong with them, you can't question it, that does create the permission structure for a system like this where, someone raises their hand and says, well, I'm disabled.
Yeah.
They're like, well, okay, that's fine.
Right.
We don't want to cause you offense by saying you don't look disabled, etc.
Yeah, whereas there are actually objective truths and objective facts,
Sure.
especially in medicine. Next on Rising, the 2026 Winter Olympics opening ceremony will take place tonight, and the US is feeling the pressure of its current political tensions. We'll be right back with that after after this. The 2026 Winter Olympic Games officially kick off today. The opening ceremony takes place this afternoon, marking the start of the Milano Cortina Games. As the US enters the final moments of prepping its athletes for the competitions, America is also feeling the pressure of its current political climate. Minneapolis, Minnesota reached a boiling point with clashes between protesters and Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers, or ICE, this month, and the killing of 2 American citizens, Renee Good and Alex Pretty. As these tragedies were met with outcries across the country, US Olympic officials are changing the name of an athlete community space for the Games from the Ice House to Winter House.
The U.S. figure skating, hockey, and speed skating organizations are hosting the club venue in a Milan hotel. They said the name change reflected the concept of creating a private space free of distractions for athletes and their guests to celebrate the unique experience of the Winter Games. This comes as hundreds of protesters rallied in Milan's Central Square last weekend, demanding the U.S. ICE agents who are assisting with security at the Games this month leave Italy entirely.
According to US officials, an ICE unit will help monitor for criminal activity at the Games, but will not conduct any immigration operations. And in the past, this kind of activity from US agents has been standard, but in the wake of the violence in Minneapolis, many Italian politicians, including Milan's mayor, said these officers are no longer welcome in their city. First of all, are you looking forward to the Olympic Games, Amber?
I'm very excited. I love the Olympics. I get super thrilled about them every time they come around. I loved when they changed it to where the Summer Games and the Winter Games were on off schedules. So it was every 2 years you got an Olympics instead of every 4 you got both.
Sure.
Amazing. More Olympics, spread it out. Yes,
Excellent.
I love it. But it's always a shame, I think, when politics get too involved in sports, because they are opportunities, especially in the case of the Olympics, for the country to really come together around a shared goal and a shared celebration, much with the Super Bowl and the halftime show. That's gotten to be a distraction as well. And Ice House, Winter House, it seems a bit silly to me that the idea that people, I guess, would enter the hospitality tent and immediately think of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It's the Winter Games. There's ice everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I take that point. I wonder, though, like, I interpret this not as we can't have a thing called the Ice House because we're opposed to ICE, the immigration agency, and more it will become a kind of meme, or there'll be a lot of trollish comment about it, or it'll become a thing which it just isn't if we change the name, rather than the name change in and of itself being indicative of a political point of view. Now, there's a whole other debate about sport and politics and how those two things intersect. I can't recall exactly what the games were at which the 2 Black American athletes on the podium gave the Black Power salute.
Atlanta?
I think it was before that. I think it was further in the past than that. It was our experts in the production room are saying it was in the 60s sometime. But there have been instances like that where people have obviously used the platform of sports to make political points. I'm not opposed to people making political points just because they're sports stars. They have the right to use their platform however they like. The one thing I would say is we're just in such a divisive moment that I think it's just difficult to find anything that people rally around in an apolitical or non-political way, and there are so many instances where just people see things through completely different lenses.
Yeah, that's how I feel. This is like the one thing we have that has not been completely overtaken by politics. Can we just have the one thing? Right. Lindsay and I were talking recently on the show about the Australian Open and the reporter who was there asking questions about the U.S. political dynamics to the tennis players. And it similarly became such a distraction, and all the questions went viral, and these athletes were clearly not happy with having to address this. They weren't prepared to do it. They didn't want to do it. And so then you put them in a difficult position because they started getting heat for not saying anything from people who wanted them to vociferously denounce ICE. And now they're suddenly the bad guy when they just didn't want to comment because they didn't feel like it was their place.
Yeah, while I would generally, of course, almost always defend journalists, I found that thing at the Australian Open peculiar because someone sent me a clip of that being asked of one female player, and I was puzzled by it, and I asked the person who'd sent me it, is this player known for a political viewpoint? And it's like, no, this guy was asking every single American player at a press conference. It was whether they were, was it awkward for them as an American or something? It was suggesting that they should be critical.
Yeah, that they felt, did they basically feel a certain type of way about being an American athlete and technically representing the country, which the Australian Open, I mean, tennis generally, you're not really representing the country. I mean, yes, you're an American player and you want the Americans to do well.
But you're not
it's
playing
an individual
for the
sport,
country.
right? It's not like the Olympics. So it is a fundamentally different scenario that's taking place there. And there were, you know, a couple of athletes like Madison Keys and Coco Gauff who have shared political statements in the past. But when you're talking about Taylor Fritz and Jessica Pegula and Amanda Anisimova, they have been very apolitical. And now you're forcing them to use their platform in a way that you want them to.
Right.
And it was obviously meant for this reporter to try to get this like catchy moment.
Play American players or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's the thing. And it was seemed to me contrived in that way to create a politicization of people who were not political figures. I think it would be completely different if you had the equivalent of a Colin Kaepernick kind of figure who is very much identified with a political stance. Then that form of questioning becomes much more viable. But to ask it as a broad thing, I think that's a bit much. And I kind of hope that what we're talking about is heeded at the Olympics, because I don't think, you know, that question to every single American Olympic athlete would be a bit much, I would think.
Yeah, too much. And we have so many amazing athletes who are going to be in the Olympics. Lindsey Vonn recently came out of retirement. She won, I believe, her first World Cup in quite a number of years. Then sadly suffered another ACL injury, but she is still going to compete, which I think shows a lot of courage. I don't know if she'll be able to walk again after these Olympics, but kudos to her nonetheless. We've got some great snowboarders. The hockey team is obviously great. And so I just hope people are going to go into this feeling hopeful and excited and wanting to cheer on these incredible athletes, and that the athletes are not subjected to political interrogations.
Sure. My favorite at the Winter Olympics is the luge, because I just think that's a crazy sport. So thanks for joining us on Rising. The teleprompter that normally tells me what to say is saying something completely different, but do join us next week. We will be back at the same time in the same place. President Trump seems to be alarming Democrats with his latest comments on the 2026 midterm elections.
For instance, there's this exchange during an interview with NBC News where Trump said that if states can't conduct elections properly and timely, something else will have to happen.
Will you trust the results of the midterms if Republicans lose control of Congress?
I will, if the elections are honest.
During a podcast interview with former FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino, Trump said that Republicans, quote, ought to nationalize the voting, end quote. During the NBC interview, however, Trump said this.
And I didn't say national, I said there are some areas in our country that are extremely corrupt. They have very corrupt elections. As an example, voter ID. Why don't the Democrats want voter ID?
This prompted the View's Whoopi Goldberg to weigh in on the matter, saying in part, quote, has nobody showed you the things that have come out of your mouth, sir? You did say that, but it's just a hint that we're going to hear more election fraud claims if the GOP loses. Senator Ruben Gallego, a Democrat, took it further, saying that if Trump were to, quote, sabotage the midterms, Americans should respond with a general strike that would grind the country to a halt. Gallego said Thursday, quote, we need to make sure that we have an ultimate response to that, which I believe has to be a true national strike, in the sense that if they do this, if they try to overthrow our democracy, if you're allied with democracy, do not go to work. If you're a pilot, do not show up. If you drive a train, do not show up. If you're a teacher, do not show up. Well, lots to discuss here, Amber. Take it away.
Okay, so I think what was happening here is that they were probably talking about the SAVE Act, which is the bill that is sort of lingering in Congress that would create national voter ID. And Republicans are very upset with how slowly the bill has been moving through committee. Senator Mitch McConnell was in the hospital, might still be in the hospital for the flu, and he sits on the chair of the committee that needs to do the markup to advance the bill. So some Republicans sent him a letter asking him to hurry up and get the bill through. John Thune is also not super thrilled about the SAVE Act because he doesn't want any federal control over elections. And so there's this big fight happening in Congress between the more, I suppose, right-wing Republicans and the more establishment folks. The complaint about the SAVE Act is that Republicans fear that if they pass this bill, that gives permission to Democrats to further federalize certain controls over elections. But my response to that would be that there was a federal election bill that was brought up during the Biden administration. It was actually one of the first major legislative pushes that they made. It ultimately failed due to some opposition from more moderate Democrats who were concerned about the same thing. But they've already tried to do it. So I think the complaints from Republicans that, well, if we do it, the Democrats will do it, and then they'll have control over elections the next time they take power. Everybody's trying to have some federal control over elections. But there's always been this question of, do the states get to control every aspect of the electoral process, or are there some things that should be codified on a national level so we have some kind of set standard? And there's arguments for both, right? Because when you have the federal government trying to run every election in all of the states and precincts and localities, that is an inordinately difficult task for a single bureaucracy to manage. And so that's better done on the local and state level. But are there some things like voter ID, perhaps a national, holiday for election day that maybe makes sense to do in Congress?
Sure. So obviously I have a very different view on that, and I'm kind of team Whoopi Goldberg on this, but I want to get into the issue about federalizing elections generally in a second, because I do think there are arguments for and against that. But one of the difficulties here with Trump, and I want to get the quote exactly right, is his bombastic or at least inexact way of putting things, because the actual quote was, the Republicans should say, we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least many 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting. So, first of all, he did use the word nationalized. But secondly, to say a political party should take over the voting is, obviously that sets alarm bells off on the other side, as it would if Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom stood up and said Democrats should take over the voting. Now, that's, you and I have talked about January the 6th numerous times. I don't think we need to relitigate our arguments on that. But there are, the issue that you raise that I've most in common with of the points you made was this point about, should there be is it permissible for there to be some federal controls or baselines, even if the actual administration of voting is through the states? So, way back, I had to look this up because I'd frankly forgotten about it. In the early 90s, there was a law passed that enables a thing that's now just commonplace everywhere, of the DMV giving you the option to register to vote when, when you do that. Nobody, certainly it wasn't that controversial at the time. I don't think anyone would say that's the federal government seizing control of elections. It's enabling easier registration, which, or more convenient registration. That seems to me, if that sort of thing is what we're talking about, that's a very different debate to saying a political party, whichever one it is, should take over the voting.
Yeah, I think it is, as you put it, the inexact way that Trump often speaks about these issues, because when I hear on social media from conservatives and Republicans who are advocating for passage of the SAVE Act, one of the other things that they routinely bring up is the idea that we have certain states that are able to get their results out very quickly after polls close. Florida is a great example of this. They changed their system pretty aggressively since the 2000 recount and have been one of the most streamlined, efficient states to count votes and get those tallies out very quickly without delay. And they don't allow a lot of, postmarked ballots or things happening after Election Day. And so when you contrast that with some states that have vote tallies taking place, a week after Election Day and we're sitting around on our hands waiting for results, does that mean we should have some kind of federal baseline where we don't allow states to allow people to cure ballots after Election Day or postmark ballots for 3 days after Election Day so that we have all of the results coming out at the same time and people can feel confident in those results without sort of the fishiness or weirdness of these delays.
I mean, I think that though that the perception of fishiness is one that, to my mind, Trump in particular, more so even than the broader Republican Party, has fostered in an unjustified way to undermine faith in elections. But to go to the broader point that you make about the speed of results, that I think is an interesting debate in and of itself, because I am not particularly opposed really to the idea of paper ballots only. If you have paper ballots, though, you need human beings to physically count the ballots. And so the declaration of results takes a much longer time. In Ireland and Britain, it's paper ballots overwhelmingly. And so the results take days, but people don't consider the delay of that to be something fishy, to use your word, or to be something that undermines public confidence in elections. I think what has undermined public confidence in elections has been a concerted effort for partisan reasons to do that.
I will say that one of the big issues that people had in 2020 that was really separate from Trump's public comments about what happened was, and I've always said this too, is that there hasn't been evidence that votes were changed on some mass scale or that there were enough errors to swing the election to Joe Biden. Is it possible to happen? I guess, but we haven't seen evidence of that. But what I found actually more concerning was how much the rules were changed so close to Election Day because of the pandemic. And so that's a lot of where that uncertainty came from, because in Pennsylvania, for example, you had local officials changing the rules to allow, certain votes cast without signatures on mail-in ballots, or certain localities were allowing people to cure mail-in ballots and others weren't. So the standardized process that we would typically expect got really upended. And because the rules were changed so close to Election Day, I think a lot of precincts did not have the proper guidance that they needed to run the election in a way that was abiding by those new standards. And there were a lot of open questions about, and in court cases at the time, including in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, about what exactly the rule changes meant for those election officials. And so that element of it, of the rule changing as opposed to what happened to ballots once they were turned in, was where I think people actually had legitimate concerns.
I think that there were, I mean, that's the part where I think that there is a debate to be had about about those rules in relation to the pandemic and the need to not disenfranchise people, but also to abide by rules. Now, that debate is very, very different from Trump's constant reiteration of the false idea that the election was rigged. And on the point of the court cases, sometimes one hears from very MAGA people, not from you, I notice, because you're more accurate about these things, but there's this idea that, those court cases weren't adjudicated on the facts, they were adjudicated only on the basis of whether there was standing. That is true in some cases. It's certainly not true in all cases, where in a number of those court cases, the specifics were looked into, and as you, I think, acknowledged, there wasn't evidence of rigging. So,
well, we will see what happens with the SAVE Act. I think that's going to be an interesting fight in Congress. Yeah. Up next, the NFL selection of Bad Bunny for Sunday's halftime show is facing backlash from some on the right. We'll talk about it next. Stick with us. Ahead of the big football game this Sunday, you know which one I'm talking about. Artist Bad Bunny is facing heat from conservatives over his comments at the Grammy Awards.
Bad Bunny received a standing ovation, not just for breaking records with the first Spanish-language album of the year win, but also for showing solidarity toward immigrants living in America. Let's listen.
Hey, thanks to God, I'm gonna say, eyes out. We're not savage, we're not animals, we're not aliens, we are humans, and we are Americans.
Conservative influencer Emily Austin said in an interview with the Wall Street Journal, America gave him such a great opportunity to really amplify his career on another level. He took that platform that he's built here and has now completely turned into bashing this country. Ice out is not realistic, and it is reckless and dangerous. White House spokeswoman Abigail Jackson told the Wall Street Journal in a statement, "Federal law enforcement officers work heroically to protect American communities, and anyone pointing the finger at law enforcement instead of the actual criminals is simply doing the bidding of criminal illegal aliens."
Even President Trump has weighed in on the big game's halftime pick, saying in October, quote, "I don't know who he is. I don't know why they're doing it. It's like crazy." And then they blame it on some promoter that they hired to pick up entertainment.
Turning Point USA, the group founded by the late conservative activist Charlie Kirk, announced that it is hosting a counter program to the halftime show that will include artists like Kid Rock, Lee Brice, and Brantley Gilbert.
Meanwhile, there are some mixed feelings among NFL players about Bad Bunny's upcoming halftime performance. A survey conducted by The Athletic of anonymous NFL players showed that 58.6% of the players said that they like the NFL's selection of Bad Bunny for the halftime show, while 41.4% said no. One NFC defensive player told The Athletic, quote, "I've heard his music, obviously, but I don't speak Spanish, so I'm not a big fan. But I do think it's cool to have him because America is based on diversity. America was built on immigration. So I feel like having him just furthers that American dream. I like it. I like the choice."
Another NFC offensive player said, "I don't even know who Bad Bunny is. I always think it should be an American. I think they're trying too hard with this international stuff." Now, obviously, he's from Puerto Rico.
I was going to say, yeah.
The Athletic, they put a little postscript note in there in the story to note that he is technically an American citizen. That NFL player had it wrong, but
yeah, it's that thing though becomes it's so frequently cited with Puerto Rico and the influencer we quoted earlier, you know, about him coming to America and all that. Like, Puerto Ricans are American citizens, so you know.
He also sort of implied that he was like part of the immigrant community, which further blurred the lines, I think.
Possibly.
Yeah,
possibly.
It's all confusing.
Yeah, it is. It is all confusing. I mean, I think we were talking earlier about the Olympics, and in that discussion we mentioned the fact that everything has become divisive now, or the vast majority of things. Now, Bad Bunny's hugely successful artist. I looked up his chart positions before, and he has like 4 #1 albums in a row. So that obviously demonstrates a breadth of appeal. That being said, he has made his political views on the immigration question, on the question of ICE, very, very clear. A lot of people are very sympathetic with those views. A lot of people dislike those views a lot. It's clearly going to be a political flashpoint, and people who don't like it will presumably turn over to the TPUSA Kid Rock-led extravaganza.
Hey, I actually do love Kid Rock, and I like the artists that the Turning Point got. But Brantley Gilbert and Lee Brice have not had a big hit in a long time. Now, they also have Gabby Barrett, who is a sort of up-and-coming like female country star. She's had a couple of #1 hits on the country music chart, so I am excited to see her. But it's always the case with these conservative counter-programming things that we get like the bottom of the barrel when it comes to artists. Like, we're not going to get Beyonce or some mega star coming out to perform, which is a shame. But I think the other part of this that kind of gets overlooked in terms of the political nature of the halftime show is not just his stance on ICE and immigration and politics generally, but some other conservatives have been upset over his advocacy for queer activism. So he, I believe, said that he was thinking about wearing a dress during the halftime show because he wants to show support to those communities. And conservatives, and look, I'm one of them, I don't like seeing a dude in a dress. It just is what it is. You're allowed to do it. There's
free country,
I know.
Free country.
No, you're allowed to do it. And then I look at it and I go, that's weird. And then I move on. But
yeah, I mean, if he wants to wear a dress, I'm fine with him wearing a dress. But it's just so many of these. I mean, it's just such a splintering of what is considered acceptable, admirable, unadmirable, all of that stuff. And the NFL obviously is getting increasingly dragged into these debates and has been getting dragged into these debates for years now. There was the Take a Knee protest, which I was completely fine with, and Trump certainly wasn't, and was calling for people, I can't remember, were calling for players to be fired or something over that. Right. So there's going to be, political uproar about this. It's a bit of a shame. I mean, the big game, as we are apparently referring to it, is, always the most watched moment on American television during that year, because it has the capacity to bring so many people together, it's going to be there's going to be political controversy without any question.
I think this is the first year too that people realize that it was Jay-Z's production company that is behind the pick for the halftime show. And so I wonder if Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner, after this year might change that arrangement, because I have a lot of complaints about Roger Goodell, as any NFL fan does, and the people watching know what I'm talking about. But I don't think he anticipated or wanted this level of controversy surrounding the halftime show. And so I'm curious if they will either find someone different, or maybe they'll put together some kind of committee that selects future halftime shows. Because it is kind of weird to have it basically run by one artist and producer.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really. Yeah, I wouldn't really dispute that point. And I mean, obviously it's a choice that is made, in a conscious fashion. Like I say, I'm all in favor of Bad Bunny doing it, but I understand that lots of people will have a massive objection. It is, I agree, odd to have that one person, and then to have the kind of counter programming. I mean, it is a free country. TP USA can do what they wish, but that then, it seems to me, intensifies the political schism, because they're very explicitly saying, if you don't like Bad Bunny and you don't like what he thinks of ICE, and perhaps you don't like his views on LGBTQ issues, then come and have a more conservative musical celebration with Kid Rock instead. Whatever. I don't know. Just, you mentioned about, country artists and so on. This is a side tangent, but as someone who had associated at least contemporary country music with a more conservative view, it's been interesting to me that in recent years you have had people, some described as country, some described as Americana, of a more progressive view.
Right. Jason Isbell, Sturgill Simpson, Maren Morris. There's been a lot more.
Tyler Childers.
Yes, definitely. And it's interesting. There's been a lot of infighting in the country music scene because of that. And some people, like Maren Morris, outrightly leaving country music because she was frustrated from the backlash that she got from fans for expressing political views. And a lot of them just don't speak on politics at all if they can help it, because the fan base is overwhelmingly pretty conservative. So that is another sort of interesting dynamic. I mean, one thing I've noticed with country music, I've written about this before, is that a lot of the journalists who cover country music are liberal, because most journalists are liberal. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. And they tend to elevate the artists who do express liberal political views, even if they're not as popular on the country music charts. Now, obviously, Tyler Childers is an exception to this. He's immensely successnumber
Sure.
But one of them was Mickey Guyton. She's a black country music artist. She's been around for over a decade now, and she's had a number of mildly successful hits, but hasn't had ever a huge breakout moment in her career. And the arts media and even New York Times and Rolling Stone have made her out to be like the next big thing from country music, and it's all framed around her political advocacy.
Yeah.
But in terms of popularity and the success of her music, it's not really there. And so there is oftentimes, in my opinion, a concerted effort to try to highlight this political shift in the country music scene in a way that intensifies this
possibly
division.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Robbie and I were talking earlier this week about something else cultural. The Melania documentary and how it had been written and then its ticket sales. I actually think that for all the complaints about liberal political journalism, I actually think arts journalism is more liberal in its general outlook, because I think that's just who is naturally drawn to typically writing about those things. So, I mean, I would assume that does apply to country music as well as to many of these other.
One final point on this this big game and the halftime show. I do think that the NFL was probably not thinking about this in as much political terms as they were international terms. The league has obviously been making efforts to develop more of an international presence. There were multiple opening games in Europe this year. One of the opening games next year is going to be in Australia. So they are trying to expand their presence worldwide. There were some games in Brazil. I think that the selection of Bad Bunny was probably done more so to try to appeal to a global audience than it was to just anger the Americans.
That makes sense. And it may well work as well.
We'll see. All right. We have a lot more to talk about on Rising. Stick with us.